Hey guys, tonight we're going to unravel a story so peculiarly quaint, so astonishingly earnest in its absurdity, that you may begin to question where reality ends and bedtime nonsense begins. Imagine a quiet, lantern-lit 19th century American town, picket fences, clanking cowbells, and the kind of brick-paved streets that just beg for a scandal involving jam. But in this town, the scandal doesn't involve rival general stores or the preacher's runaway cow. No, it involves squirrels. Thousands of them. And not just passing through, no, these were squirrels with motives. With habits. With an apparent vendetta against baked goods and seed grain. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And of course, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is where you are. Because somewhere out there, it's always bedtime for someone who's just learned that a town once took up arms, figuratively, and occasionally literally, against squirrels. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive in the year 1851, in a leafy New England town called Fairweather Hollow, a place that lives up to its name exactly 1.5 seasons per year. Picture tidy rows of whitewashed houses, a square dominated by a stubbornly leaning gazebo, and a post office so small the postmaster keeps the stamps in his vest pocket. It's early fall, the kind of cool crisp morning where your breath fogs a little and the air smells faintly of chimney soot and ripe apples. You trudge along the cobbled street, boots creaking, passing a general store with a pickle barrel on one side and a suspiciously aggressive chicken on the other. There's a sign in the window that reads, "Clothespins, flour, and no further discussion about the squirrel incident." Curious. You turn a corner and find the small town square occupied by a congregation of citizens, all peering upward. On the steeple of the Presbyterian church sits a squirrel, not just any squirrel, but a rather corpulent one, with its tail curled like a cinnamon bun and a hunk of something pilfered clutched in its tiny paws. "That's the 5th one this week," someone mutters. "They're watching us now," says another. You blink. You'd been expecting maybe a minor kerfuffle over missing cornmeal, not a squirrel surveillance state. It begins with the harvest, or lack thereof. Fairweather Hollow depends on its grain. Wheat, oats, corn, all carefully grown, stored, and distributed in the local granary with ledger books so precise they could induce sleep in a mathematician. But that year, something goes wrong. Crates go mysteriously empty. Bins show signs of disturbance. Whole sacks of acorns, stored for livestock feed, vanish overnight. First, it's blamed on sloppy stacking. Then on teenage boys with time to kill. And finally, inevitably, on squirrels. Not a vague accusation either. There are witnesses. Mrs. Tansley sees one dragging a cob of corn into a drainpipe like a smug little lumberjack. Old Mr. Bramble finds a stash of barley under his porch next to a stash of doll shoes, which raises even more questions. The schoolteacher catches one with its paws deep in her lunch pail. But it's not just the thefts. It's the numbers. Squirrels everywhere. Up trees, under floorboards, leaping between roofs like nut-fueled gymnasts. You begin to wonder if the town was built on a cursed hickory grove. And unlike your average woodland scamp, these squirrels aren't shy. They maintain eye contact. They display acrobatics. The townsfolk gather in the community hall, a narrow wood-paneled structure that smells of ink, linseed oil, and a deeply embedded sense of procedural self-importance. The mayor, a man with a side part so sharp it could slice butter, calls the room to order. "We face," he declares, "an infestation." The word lands with the softness of a piano drop from the second floor. The room erupts. The squirrels have taken over the churchyard. They're eating my gooseberries. They made a nest in my stovepipe. And last week, one stole my hat. Maybe it thought it was a nut. Laughter. Tension. And then silence. Because the mayor places both hands on the table and says the words that will echo through the town's history like a tin pan in a rainstorm. We must consider action. Not pest control. Not deterrence. Action. Over the next few days, town discussions, usually limited to biscuit recipes and speculation about whether the postmaster is secretly married, shift into what local newspapers dubbed the Squirrel Crisis. Flyers appear with slogans like, "Don't let them take another kernel. Squirrels work in silence, so must we. If you see something, throw something." Children are warned not to leave snacks unattended. Teachers begin each lesson with a reminder, "Keep your lunch under your desk and your eyes on the trees." And still, the squirrels come. Bold, fluffy, unrepentant. Historians still argue whether the town overreacted or simply cracked under the tension of harvest loss and an overabundance of idle time. Some suggest the entire war was a theatrical overcompensation for failed agricultural planning. Others believe it was a rare example of cross-species misunderstanding and the fragile pride of humankind. But for Fairweather Hollow, in that moment, it's deadly serious. Not that anyone dies. Unless you count the mayor's hat, which is never seen again. You're still on the cobbled lane of Fairweather Hollow, though the cobbles are now dusted with early autumn leaves, red gold, the occasional leaf that suspiciously resembles a paw print. The mood in town has shifted, and you can feel it in the way people close their shutters a little faster, the way conversations drop to a murmur when the wind rustles in the trees. The squirrels, once background fauna, the kind you admire for a second before returning to your apple tart, have taken center stage. And not in a charming woodland creature sort of way. These squirrels have become folklore with fur. The first official complaint, properly documented and sealed in the town archives with a drop of candle wax and considerable self-importance, comes from the town baker, Mrs. Eliza Corby. A plump and exacting woman with the culinary precision of a French clockmaker, Mrs. Corby reports that 3 pecan pies and a tray of corn muffins vanished from her windowsill within 12 minutes of cooling. Witnesses? Yes, 2 young lads who describe the assailants as gray, bushy, and highly coordinated. One even claims the squirrels operated in formation. That's nonsense, declares the town clerk, flipping through his incident log. But the stories multiply. A farmer discovers his cornfield picked nearly clean, every husk opened, every cob stripped bare with a delicacy not unlike a dinner party. One old gentleman spots a squirrel dragging a roll of thread up a tree, as if preparing to mend tiny trousers. Another finds a walnut lodged firmly in his chimney, just beneath a page from the Methodist hymnal. Things escalate. A group of local boys, attempting to prove their civic loyalty, set up squirrel snares using peanut brittle and fishing twine. What they catch instead, a pair of socks, a tin cup, and one very annoyed duck. Soon, the town meetings become less about questions and more about declarations. A certain Mr. Wilfred Thimble suggests deputizing townsfolk to patrol their own property, armed with brooms and a firm voice. Mrs. Corby proposes a squirrel curfew, their diurnal. I read it in the almanac. While Judge Tully recommends installing small fences around all public food displays, though when asked how high a fence would need to be to deter something that climbs trees for fun, he merely harumphs and fiddles with his spectacles. Eventually, the motion passes. In a rare moment of unity, the town declares what it describes as a civic initiative to resist squirrel encroachment. In other words, war? Though they hesitate to call it that outright. Too dramatic. Too European. Instead, the poster that goes up on the post office wall reads, "Citizens of Fairweather Hollow, let us reclaim our grain and our dignity. Join the Squirrel Watch. Be firm, be vigilant, be polite. Yes, be polite. This is, after all, a respectable town." And so the Squirrel Watch Committee forms. Volunteers gather in the town square with armbands, handbells, and pamphlets on proper decorum during rodent encounters. The official uniform? A plain brown waistcoat, and a straw hat with a red ribbon so others can identify you without mistaking you for a particularly large scarecrow. You're handed a bell and a small satchel of dried lentils. The bell is for deterrence. The lentils are unclear. Possibly symbolic. The town is divided into squirrel patrol sectors, East Grove, Orchard Row, Grain Alley, and the highly disputed Pie Triangle, where multiple baked goods have vanished without a trace. Each group is assigned a patrol route, a rotating captain, and a ledger to record incidents, real or imagined. Your first patrol is uneventful. Birds chirp, dogs nap, children stare at you like you've joined a slightly unhinged cult. You see exactly 3 squirrels, none of whom even acknowledge your presence. One is chewing on something unidentifiable, another is asleep, and the third seems to be playing with a clothes peg. You ring your bell once, just to see what happens. It ignores you. You ring it again. It blinks. Then it flicks its tail and strolls off. Yes, strolls, as if it has a meeting to attend and no time for nonsense. Still, the committee logs the patrol as technically successful. Over the following weeks, the incidents continue. Squirrels steal lace. Squirrels relocate herbs from garden beds to rooftop gutters. One squirrel allegedly snatches a prayer book during Sunday service. The minister tries to spin it as divine intervention, but even he looks rattled. Historians still argue whether the squirrels were actually increasing in number or if the town's perception had simply shifted, its collective paranoia casting every twitching tail as a tactical maneuver. What's certain is that the watch becomes more elaborate. Children craft warning posters, some helpful, secure your nuts, and some less so, squirrels equals tiny goblins, avoid eye contact. Elderly ladies begin sprinkling their porches with mint tea leaves, convinced the aroma is a deterrent. The blacksmith starts selling squirrel tongs, which are just fireplace pokers rebranded with enthusiasm. The town newspaper runs a column titled The Nut Line, featuring weekly squirrel updates with alarming headlines like cunning in the canopy and fur and loathing in Fairweather. Still, no decisive action has worked. Mrs. Corby, having suffered her 7th pastry loss, finally says what others are thinking. What if they know? The room falls silent. Because that is the unspoken fear, isn't it? That these squirrels aren't just stealing for survival, but doing so with awareness. That they are organized. The days shorten, as autumn always insists they must, and the shadows around Fairweather Hollow grow longer. What once felt like quaint community vigilance now leans into something eerily organized. Squirrel watch captains begin holding morning briefings, complete with hand-drawn maps showing suspected squirrel traffic corridors and diagrams of nut caches allegedly located using folkloric intuition and bad luck. You are now patrolling twice daily, morning and dusk, with a borrowed brass bell and a sense of purpose so simultaneously absurd and sincere it could only belong to small-town America in the 1850s. Today, you're stationed near Grain Alley, which is not a proper alley but a gently sloping path between the old grist mill and Mrs. Pensby's root cellar, known mostly for its echoing acoustics and occasional skunk. The squirrels love it. You take position by a stump that the watch has dubbed post number 3 and observe the signs: fresh acorn shells, faint scratches on the wooden trim, and the unsettling discovery of one human child's mitten inexplicably stuffed with millet. The squirrels, of course, are nowhere to be seen. Except, there, in the crook of a maple branch. It sits, eyes locked on yours, as if evaluating your moral character. The sun glints off its fur. It's holding a crust of bread, seeded artisan, likely stolen from someone's carefully packed lunch. You raise the bell. It munches faster, with no hint of fear. Then it turns and leaps, tail high and gloriously smug, into the canopy. That's the 3rd time this week that exact squirrel has made eye contact. You've begun calling it Edgar. As evening falls, a council is called in the town hall, lit now by flickering gas lamps and the soft groan of chairs being dragged into circles. On the chalkboard are the words: strategic response, a balanced approach to furry insurgency. Pexley Cray, an overly enthusiastic tinsmith turned watch sergeant, presents the evening's findings: 3 squirrel sightings, 2 near-nod hymnals, and 1 serious breach of pie security involving a sweet potato tart and an unattended windowsill. The mood is tense. There's talk of escalation. Mr. Godfrey proposes hiring a trained falconer. Mrs. Pensby suggests bringing in feral cats. The Reverend opposes both, citing scriptural themes of peace and also, quite frankly, a dislike of birds that stare too much. And then comes the most unexpected suggestion: a formal declaration. Not just town gossip or flyers or watch committees, but an actual, documented, council-approved declaration of hostilities. The room quiets. You can hear the ink bottle sweating. A hand rises slowly. Judge Elwood Tully, silver-haired and rarely amused, clears his throat and reads from a parchment draft he clearly prepared well in advance. Let it be known, on this 12th day of October in the year of our Lord 1851, that the township of Fairweather Hollow hereby declares a state of informal, though no less passionate, war against the squirrels, in defense of grain, dignity, and the sanctity of baked goods. He sets the paper down. Everyone claps. Some clap more than once. Historians still argue whether this document counts as an official act or merely a performative tantrum disguised in legalese. But it is signed, sealed, and, most crucially, delivered to the town records room, where it sits today between a birth certificate and a recipe for pickle brined pork. The following morning, signs go up. Squirrel alert level, acorn orange. Only you can defend the tarts. Bell not working? Yell firmly. The watch grows. Children start training their dogs to chase squirrels, though results vary. One clever mutt named Buttons does quite well until distracted by a sandwich. Others simply lie down and stare at clouds. Retired men with nothing to lose begin crafting squirrel deterrents. One a wind-powered scarecrow made entirely of spoons. It spins madly on the town green until a young girl, Mildred, gets lightly concussed by a flying teaspoon and the device is quietly decommissioned. Squirrel responses grow bolder. At Mrs. Corby's bakery, a whole bag of walnuts disappears despite being locked in the pantry. There's no sign of forced entry, but the hinges are oiled and a footprint, possibly tiny and rodent-shaped, is found in the flour. A farmer reports a scarecrow dressed in his shirt and hat has been moved. Not blown over. Moved. Turned to face his window with a pinecone in its straw hand. Mrs. Pensby, previously a staunch dove in the squirrel debate, changes sides when her late husband's prized tobacco pouch appears on the roof of the meeting house stuffed with chestnuts. People stop speaking in complete sentences. Everyone just says, "Well, you know how it is," and nods solemnly. That afternoon, a minor scandal breaks out when little Timothy Marsh is found feeding squirrels under the apple tree with a sack of pumpkin seeds and a lullaby. He is only 6, but the town discusses whether leniency sets a bad precedent. The mayor intervenes. No more food gifts, he says. No more lullabies. This is war, not a nursery. And just like that, squirrel-human relations plunge to new lows. You, however, begin to wonder. You notice that the squirrels never harm people. They don't destroy structures. They don't even scatter their loot. They hoard. They stash. They organize. You mention this theory at a watch meeting. People stare. Then someone says, "You've been spending too much time near the maple grove." That place makes folks soft. But you still wonder. You wonder if this is more than instinct. If perhaps there's a strange, silent intelligence behind the walnut raids. A pattern to the disappearing pies. A reason for the choir book vanishing only from altos. You don't know yet. But you suspect. And Edgar definitely knows something. The next morning dawns with a misty chill, the sort that makes even the squirrels look fluffed up and existential. You pull on your watch vest, wrinkled, slightly mustard-stained from last week's regrettable sandwich incident, and head to the town square, where the latest strategy meeting is underway beneath the gazebo that perpetually leans, as if it, too, is unsure of the squirrel's situation. The agenda, chalked on a portable slate, reads: Pie perimeter failures. Unexplained walnut pyramid. Edgar sightings, please remain calm. You note with mild alarm that your own name is listed next to Edgar Liaison? With a question mark and what appears to be a drawing of a top hat with teeth. It turns out your quiet mutterings about patterns and possible squirrel communication have made an impression. Perhaps too much of one. Judge Tully leans in and says, "You've been observing them. Not just chasing them off. That's peculiar. We like peculiar." Which is exactly how, before your tea has cooled, you're promoted to Rodent Relations Monitor, a title invented on the spot and confirmed by a show of hands and one enthusiastic goose. Your new task? Monitor Edgar. Take notes. See if he blinks in Morse code. See if he rearranges acorns into threatening formations. You accept with the solemnity of someone who does not entirely understand the assignment. The rest of the day is quiet, until dusk falls, and with it, the strangest event yet. You're strolling near the edge of Pi Triangle, notebook in hand, when you hear a sharp thud. You turn, heart leaping, and spot it, a triangle of folded leaves. Edgar is on a low branch, his eyes locked on yours with the contemplative stare of someone considering whether you're trustworthy enough to be shown the secret room behind the bookshelf. You crouch slowly and pick up the chestnut. It's uncracked. Whole. A gift? A warning? You whisper, "What does it mean?" Edgar blinks. Then vanishes. The chestnut is added to the town ledger, but your report earns more amusement than belief. The mayor taps the table and says, "Let's not assign meaning to every acorn, or we'll be writing treaties with cabbage tomorrow." But you can't shake the feeling. Meanwhile, back in the wider town, the war effort shifts from defensive to philosophical. People begin wondering not just how to stop the squirrels, but what exactly they're after. Theories swirl like dust in a sunbeam. They're spies. For Canada. No, it's revenge for the Great Nut Famine of 42. They're reincarnated townsfolk. That one with the crooked tail used to be my uncle. He owed me money. You visit the library, which is a modest, creaky building staffed by a woman named Miss Eunice who hasn't blinked since July. She leads you to a dusty corner and says, "Squirrels? We've got a few pamphlets and a sermon titled 'Ye Be Not Swayed by the Temptations of Furred Beasts.'" You read everything. Most of it is nonsense, but one phrase sticks out from an 1839 horticultural diary. "A clever thief will take only what you cannot spare without noticing." Historians still argue whether that passage referred to squirrels or the author's cousin, who notoriously borrowed carriages and returned them with fewer wheels. You copy the phrase down and tuck it into your notebook. That night, a thunderstorm rolls through. It breaks the heat spell, cracks open the sky, and drowns the town in a kind of theatrical panic normally reserved for Shakespearean acts involving poison or sudden swordplay. By morning, half the scarecrows have toppled, the cornfield looks like it's been stirred with a spoon, and the entire west side of the grain barn is covered in muddy paw prints leading to, and this is important, a perfectly intact pyramid of 17 acorns on the front step. It's too precise to be chance. Judge Tully draws a diagram. Mrs. Corby bakes what she calls truce tarts, filled with sweetened squash and a sense of moral superiority. The minister says perhaps the squirrels are trying to teach us something, though he can't say what. And Edgar? Edgar leaves another folded leaf triangle, this time with a smooth pebble and what appears to be the torn corner of a child's drawing. You turn the scrap over. There's a crude sketch of a squirrel beside what might be a loaf of bread. Below it, in shaky pencil, the word "share?" Your notebook falls shut without meaning to. You sit on the ground, legs crossed, watching the treetops sway. And for the first time, you consider that this isn't a war at all. Maybe it's a negotiation. Maybe it always was. The next morning, you wake earlier than usual, the chestnut and pebble from Edgar still sitting on your windowsill like gifts from a very confused forest spirit. The town, for once, is still. The air carries that post-rain hush, where everything feels temporarily forgiven. Even the pie flyers are a little less shrill, sagging damply on fence posts like overworked actors between scenes. Today, the Squirrel Watch has shifted gears. At the latest meeting, held in the town's only tavern, which now doubles as both bakery annex and squirrel observation outpost, the chalkboard reads, "New strategy, coexistence?" There's an audible gasp. Someone drops a spoon. Mrs. Pensby fans herself dramatically with a biscuit recipe. The proposal comes from a surprising source, the Reverend Mott, whose earlier stance on squirrel repentance included fire and brimstone metaphors involving lost acorns and divine judgment. But now, with his garden spared during the last walnut raid and a folded leaf offering placed gently on his sermon notes, the good Reverend has changed his tone. Perhaps, he says, adjusting his spectacles, they are not our enemies, but our mirror. A long pause follows. It is unclear whether people are absorbing the wisdom, or simply too stunned to interrupt. Judge Tully, ever skeptical, raises one eyebrow, an action that in his case counts as a 5-paragraph counterargument, and mutters, "We'll be holding hands with raccoons next." Still, a vote is taken. The idea? To test the waters of interspecies diplomacy through a carefully controlled experiment, a peace picnic. The plan is simple. A section of the town square will be designated a neutral snacking zone. Food will be placed on low tables, fruit, nuts, a sacrificial pie, and the squirrels will be observed. No bells. No shouting. No broom waving. Just watching. You expect them to line up and shake paws? Scoffs Pexley Cray, still bitter after a recent incident in which a squirrel apparently chewed through the strap of his lunch satchel and made off with a ham biscuit. But the town is tired. Tired of fighting, tired of surveillance, and very tired of explaining to guests why the picket fences now have tiny lookouts built from popsicle sticks. The picnic is set for Saturday. You spend the intervening days preparing, mostly by collecting non-threatening food items and researching squirrel behavior in the town's only copy of Natural Curiosities of the Rodent World, a book so dry it may have once been used as insulation. On the day of the picnic, the square is scrubbed clean. Tables are set with mismatched doilies, woven placemats, and at least 3 passive-aggressive teapots. Dishes of nuts, berries, dried corn, and one overly hopeful lemon tart are arranged with careful symmetry. People perch on benches, whispering, peering into tree limbs like tourists at a theatrical matinee. You stand beside the tart, trying not to make eye contact with it. The last time someone attempted a pastry peace offering, it was carried off midair by what witnesses described as a squirrel in an absolute frenzy of purpose. Then movement. First 1, then 3, then 5 squirrels emerge from shrubs, fences, rooftops. Edgar among them. He perches on a fence post, fluffing his tail with what looks like pre-diplomatic pomp. They do not rush. They do not mob the tables. They wait. 1 inches forward. Takes a berry. Darts away. More follow. Some dart. Some linger. A few even pause to sniff one another, forming an impromptu squirrel symposium at the foot of the jam dish. You hold your breath. Then Edgar approaches the tart. He sniffs. Circles. Places one paw delicately on the crust, and leaves it there. Not claiming. Not taking. Just noting. A murmur rises from the humans. Is he blessing it? Maybe he's checking for raisins. Then Edgar does something unprecedented. He turns, stands on his hind legs, and waves. It's not much. Just a flick of paw and tail. But it is unmistakably a wave. Witnessed by 15 townsfolk and 1 very confused cat. The picnic is declared a triumph. Historians still debate the authenticity of Edgar's gesture. Some say it was a natural grooming motion misinterpreted by a town desperate for reconciliation. Others argue it was, in fact, a deliberate act, a signal not just of truce, but of respect. He crafts a squirrel honors board outside the post office, listing the most noble rodents by pseudonym: Edgar, Cheeks, Velvet, Biscuit, and 1 mysterious figure known only as the Whiskered Whisperer. That night you find another folded leaf at your doorstep. This one holds a single almond and a torn scrap from the watch ledger. On it, in very careful handwriting: "Nice picnic. Good effort. No raisins next time." You laugh. And you believe, truly, for the first time since this odd tale began, that perhaps peace is not only possible. It's already here. Life in Fairweather Hollow takes on a strangely delightful rhythm in the weeks that follow the peace picnic. There's still the occasional shriek when a squirrel makes off with a freshly baked roll, but now it's followed by laughter, not alarm. The townsfolk start calling them nibbles of diplomacy, which is perhaps generous, But this is a village that once debated whether blueberry preserves were a political statement, so interpretive generosity is not new here. You begin your morning patrols more for the stroll than the security. With a thermos of tea in one hand and your now ragged notebook in the other, you wander past gardens and fence posts, and the town's only statue, a mildly heroic figure in bronze who looks vaguely surprised to be remembered. Today, you pause at the old bandstand. Edgar is already there, perched like a tiny conductor, tail twitching in lazy arcs. Around him, several younger squirrels gather. One holds a button. Another seems to be licking a pinecone. A third is, and you're fairly certain about this, attempting to wear a thimble as a hat. You nod at Edgar. He blinks, raises a paw, flicks the tail. The routine has become familiar now, like an old friend's running joke. You take it as a hello, or perhaps a commentary on your hat. Either way, it's a comfort. Meanwhile, the town has turned the so-called war into something resembling culture. The children's school puts on a play titled Nuts for Peace, a musical extravaganza featuring papier-mâché acorns and one disturbingly lifelike squirrel costume worn by a fifth grader named Arnold who now responds only to squeaks. The town paper runs a Sunday column called the Squirrel Sentinel, penned by none other than Daisy, who insists on referring to herself as Field Agent D. This week's headlines include: Edgar enjoys dandelion lunch near Tansley fence. Signs of romance? Mystery of vanishing clothespins deepens. Mrs. Corby's garden sees first squirrel yoga attempt. You help with a town art project, a mural depicting squirrels and townsfolk sharing a massive picnic under a flowering elm. It's painted on the old grain barn, where this all started. The final detail? A tiny scroll tucked into Edgar's painted paw, bearing the single word, enough. Still, the town isn't completely rid of its suspicions. There are incidents. One morning, all the church bell ropes are found tied in complex knots. Not impossible knots, just inconvenient ones, as if the squirrels were making a point about punctuality. Then, the weather vane on the post office mysteriously disappears, only to reappear on the schoolhouse roof, adorned with a garland of leaves and two perfectly balanced walnuts. And one morning, Mrs. Pensby's entire collection of teacups goes missing. She finds them precisely 2 hours later, arranged in a perfect circle around the maple tree in her backyard, each one containing exactly 3 sunflower seeds and a single forget-me-not. You visit the scene. She gestures wildly. They're sending messages again. You crouch to examine the pattern. Maybe they just wanted to hold a tea party. Mrs. Pensby frowns. Without inviting me? A fair point. Historians still argue whether these displays were signs of elevated squirrel intelligence, cheeky mischief, or the byproduct of too much autumnal boredom among both species. Some scholars believe Edgar was training the younger generation in symbolic communication. Others claim the townsfolk had, by this point, descended so deeply into the narrative that they were seeing squirrel-shaped significance in windblown leaves. You lean toward the former. Because Edgar starts bringing gifts. Not daily, not regularly, but just often enough that the habit becomes sacred. A polished stone. A painted button. Once, astonishingly, a scrap of ribbon tied in what was unmistakably a bow. You leave him an offering in return, half a pear, a cracker, a shiny coin, and the cycle continues. The town holds a ceremony, naturally. It's called the Day of Mutual Understanding, and it involves no speeches, no music, and absolutely no pie, because that's how the whole thing started. Instead, people gather quietly in the square. They wear acorn pins. They lay down small bundles of twine, seeds, and tea biscuits. A few stand under trees and simply whisper, "Thank you." A child hangs a tiny swing from a branch using shoelaces. Within the hour, it's occupied. The swing remains in use all season. Edgar attends the ceremony. He sits atop the weathered signpost by the square and surveys the crowd like a mayor preparing to hand out winter coats. He seems pleased. And yet, the truce is not without complexity. Not all squirrels are Edgars. Some are chaotic little thrill-seekers who fling crab apples at goats. One steals a quill pen from the mayor's desk and appears to write something vaguely threatening in dirt. Others, still unused to the rhythms of peace, chew through hammock ropes, causing at least one accidental splash landing in the town fountain. But no one suggests reviving the war. They grumble. They shake their heads. They say things like, "Well, you know, squirrels," and move on. The watch officially dissolves, with a commemorative tea towel issued to all former members. It reads, "We rang, they squeaked, we listened. You keep yours on your kitchen wall." And every few days, like clockwork, Edgar visits the elm outside your porch. One evening, he brings you a button shaped like a star. You nod and raise your mug. He flicks his tail. As always. And for the first time, you allow yourself the comforting thought that maybe, just maybe, some stories don't need a dramatic ending. Maybe they don't need a hero, a villain, or a decisive battle. Maybe they just need time. And patience. And someone willing to look a squirrel in the eye and say, "Okay. Let's try again." Autumn deepens, and Fairweather Hollow becomes the sort of postcard-perfect town that inspires oil paintings and quiet sighs. The trees set themselves on fire in every hue of gold and copper. Pumpkins are stacked on porches in casual elegance. Even the squirrels, once feared insurgents, now appear more like whimsical forest curators, rearranging leaves, patting down moss, and occasionally inspecting scarecrows as if auditioning for local theater. You, the town's unofficial squirrel ambassador, continue your gentle patrols, now mostly ceremonial. The bell is gone, the ledger repurposed for baking tallies, and the only remaining evidence of the great squirrel standoff is a very worn bench plaque that reads, "Here sat the ones who watched and wondered." You sit there now, sipping a cider that's half apple, half cinnamon, and all nostalgia. Edgar is nearby, dangling from a branch like a hairy ornament, grooming one paw with a deliberate calm. Around him, the younger squirrels chase each other in quiet circles, pausing only to nibble or, soft at first, just raised voices, a huff, a dropped bundle of wheat. Then louder. Urgent. You follow the noise to the granary, where several townsfolk have gathered under lantern light. They point to the door. The hinges hang ajar, swinging with an almost guilty creak. Inside, barrels are overturned. Sacks are torn. And near the far wall, an unmistakable pile of acorns, arranged in an arrow. Not a straight arrow. A curly one. Pointing toward the woods. The room buzzes with speculation. They've turned again. It's a distraction. Or maybe they're inviting us. That last one comes from young Daisy, field agent D, clutching her squirrel notebook and a pencil that is absolutely not regulation size. The room stills. Could it be? An invitation? The mayor, still recovering from an incident involving a rogue hedgehog and an unlatched garden gate, clears his throat and says, "We must proceed." Cautiously. But with grace. The decision is made. A delegation will venture into the woods to follow the squirrel-made path. You are, of course, volunteered first. Daisy insists on joining. Mrs. Corby sends a tray of ginger snaps in case of emergency diplomacy, and someone knits you a tiny flag depicting crossed walnuts. You begin at dawn. The forest is quiet, blanketed in a soft fog that turns every branch into a silhouette of polite mystery. The acorn arrows appear every 10 feet, each one more elaborate than the last. Some are flanked by little stones. Others contain pressed leaves folded like pages. One even includes a small, perfect pine cone balanced on a toothpick. You can't help but smile. Whoever built these, whichever furry little paws were responsible, they cared. About the message. About the meaning. You continue deeper. Daisy is behind you, humming a squirrel-themed tune she's inventing on the spot. It involves bravery, twigs, and something called the Great Walnut Redemption. You make a note to encourage her parents to enroll her in writing lessons. Or interpretive dance. Then you reach it. The clearing. It's a natural amphitheater of moss and dappled sunlight, ringed by trees that arch overhead like cathedral rafters. At its center sits what can only be described as a squirrel altar, an elevated stump covered in gifts. Shiny buttons, smooth rocks, feathers, a bottle cap from a soda no one in town remembers drinking. And at the top, a lopsided but unmistakable model of the Fairweather Hollow Town Hall, built entirely from acorns and twine. Daisy gasps. You blink. Because this is no stash. No chaotic pile. This is art. Possibly politics. Maybe both. You step forward, gently setting down your tray of ginger snaps on a flat stone. Then, unsure what to do next, you sit. Daisy does the same. You both wait. Minutes pass. Then Edgar appears. He steps into the clearing like a king returning from exile, tail high, eyes gleaming, little paws making barely a sound on the soft forest floor. He looks at you. Then the altar. Then the cookies. He sniffs once. Then, as solemnly as a rodent can muster, he takes a ginger snap and places it next to the model town hall. A murmur of rustling leaves surrounds you. Other squirrels emerge, lining the trees. Silent. Watching. And then, one by one, they add to the display. A thimble. A bit of red yarn. A broken pencil. A sunflower seed shaped like a heart. You sit there, unmoving, tears nearly rising from the sheer absurd beauty of it all. A parade of squirrels offering trinkets to what may be their own peculiar shrine of peace. And how he bowed, just slightly, before disappearing into the trees. You don't tell the town everything. Only what they need to know. That the squirrels have made a gesture. That the ginger snaps were well received. And that, for now, all is well. Fairweather Hollow hosts an unofficial holiday each year now, the gathering at Acorn Grove. No speeches. No fireworks. Just a long walk into the woods, a picnic basket, and the quiet hope of seeing a small tail flick among the branches. And on your porch, as the leaves begin to fall, a tiny figurine appears one evening. A squirrel. Holding a bell. Made of acorns and yarn and affection. No note. No mystery. Just gratitude. By the time the last of the leaves spiral gently from the oaks and maples of Fairweather Hollow, the squirrel truce is not just tradition, it's folklore. Children whisper tales of Edgar the Wise, who once saved the town from a great tart shortage. The baker paints tiny paw prints on her window ledge in homage. Even the skeptical Judge Tully has a brass acorn on his desk now, which he insists is merely a paperweight with whimsical leanings. You still patrol, though patrol might be overstating it. Mostly you stroll. You greet squirrels by name, even the ones who do not answer. You carry a pouch of unsalted peanuts, which you distribute like blessings. You have become, in a way, Fairweather's ambassador to the kingdom of trees. And today, as the frost begins to lace the grass, you prepare for winter's approach with a sense of calm unusual in a town that once held a formal vote on whether raisins constituted moral corruption. Preparations are underway for the inaugural Winter Scurry Festival, a celebration of the squirrel-human détente. There will be storytelling, nut-themed crafts, and a ceremonial unveiling of the great nut quilt, stitched together by a dozen devoted townsfolk and one surprisingly handy goat named Mabel. You've been asked to give a speech. You say yes, of course, and then promptly forget about it until the night before, when inspiration strikes, delivered, naturally, by Edgar, who leaves on your porch a tiny bark scroll tied with red thread. Inside is a drawing, a human and a squirrel sharing a pie under a tree. No words. Just the image. It becomes your speech. The next day, you stand in front of the town hall in a coat that smells faintly of cinnamon and pine, holding the scroll aloft. You all remember the war, you begin, and everyone chuckles. But what I remember more than the war is the waiting. The wondering. The moment when one squirrel stopped stealing, sat on a fence post, and stared me down like a professor grading a late essay. More laughter. Some nostalgic sighs. We didn't win that war, you say. We just got tired of fighting squirrels and started listening instead. At that, Edgar himself scampers onto the stage. Yes, really. and poses dramatically near your boot. The crowd erupts in applause. He basks in it with all the grace of a veteran actor at curtain call. From then on, Edgar is legend. He's cited at weddings, birthday parties, even once at the mayor's Tuesday night poker game. He may have made off with a cigar. Daisy insists he's writing a memoir, one nut at a time. But while the town celebrates, a shift begins to creep into the edges of the woods. Subtle at first. The gift piles taper off. The folded leaves grow fewer. Edgar appears less frequently. You mention it to Miss Eunice at the library, who peers over her spectacles and says, everything has its season. Even diplomacy with squirrels. Still, you wonder. And then, one morning, the signs become harder to ignore. The weather vane vanishes again, but this time, it's not returned. The children's swings, once carefully maintained by unseen paws, now sway empty. And the altar in the woods? Gone. Every acorn, every button, cleared as if it had never been. You stand in the clearing with Daisy, now a bit taller, her notebook more filled than ever. They're leaving, aren't they? She says. You don't answer right away. Because maybe they are. Or maybe they're just preparing. Historians still argue whether this was the natural ebb of the Squirrel-Town bond, or whether the squirrels simply grew tired of performance art and wanted their privacy back. You choose to believe something quieter. That they trusted you now. Enough to retreat peacefully. To let you stand on your own. Still, the town feels their absence. Mrs. Pensby sets out seed bundles with no takers. Pexley Cray erects a squirrel mailbox and receives only wind in return. The great nut quilt remains unclaimed. But no one panics. There's no talk of war. No return of the watch. Just stories. Soft, sleepy stories told at dusk, by firelight, with steaming cider and the comfort of knowing that once, your town became part of something remarkable. That maybe it still is. You keep walking the old routes, even as snow begins to fall. You wear 2 scarves now, and your boots creak like old floorboards. The woods are quiet. Not empty, but expectant. One day, a single feather appears on your windowsill, gray, striped, and curved like a smile. You take it as a sign. Then, late one afternoon, as you pass the maple tree by the square, you hear it, a sharp, deliberate clink. You turn. There, nestled at the base of the tree, is a thimble. Inside it, 1 sunflower seed. 1 perfect acorn. And a single almond, painted gold. You pick it up slowly. From a low branch above, Edgar watches. Just once more. Just enough. And then he disappears into the white. Snow blankets Fairweather Hollow in the hush of December, softening everything, fences, rooftops, even past grievances, into mounds of gentle forgetfulness. The town moves slower now, as though wrapped in wool and memory. Gone are the banners, the squirrel alerts, the frenetic scurry of watched bells and walnut inventories. In their place, quiet. A kind of comfortable stillness. You, of course, still walk your route. It's less of a duty now and more of a ritual. A nod to the past. A way of keeping company with something you can't quite name but refuse to let vanish. You walk the perimeter of the square, now lined with snowmen of varying artistic merit. One wears spectacles. One holds a wooden spoon. One, Daisy's doing, no doubt, is shaped suspiciously like a squirrel and bears a sash that reads, Minister of Nut Affairs. You tip your cap to that one. The baker waves from her shop, where steam curls from frosted windows and the scent of cinnamon sticks to your coat like a well-meant compliment. She hands you a small paper bag with a smile. No word? She asks. You shake your head. Nothing. Not since the thimble. She nods, either disappointed nor surprised. Maybe that was the goodbye. You nod back, pocket the bag, and move on, boots crunching softly beneath you. At home, you sit by the window with your tea and stare at the elm tree. Snow dusts the lower branches. The swing Daisy built last spring creaks a little, swaying under the weight of memory. You think of Edgar, of course. Of the young ones? Of the offering pile in the woods that vanished like breath on a mirror. The town has largely accepted their absence. A few still leave trinkets by trees. Some whisper thanks into branches. But mostly, people smile and get on with the ordinary magic of their lives. Still, tied around a smooth stone, it must have come during those gift exchanges, the ones you thought you had catalogued and deciphered. You untie it carefully. The stone underneath is painted. A single dot in the middle, surrounded by concentric rings. You trace it with your thumb. It feels like a ripple. Like something beginning. Or ending. Or perhaps both. Historians still debate the symbolism of the painted stone. Some argue it was a squirrel calendar. Others suggest it marked a burial site for something significant, like a hoarded tart. A few believe it was simply Edgar's abstract take on town architecture. You place it on your windowsill beside the feather and almond. And then you wait. Winter deepens. The frost grows bolder. Even the river seems to pause. On the first morning of January, a surprise. Tracks. Not human. Not canine. Tiny. Precise. Darting in arcs beneath your porch, across the lane, around the old flour barrel. You follow them, half in disbelief. They vanish near the base of the maple tree. And at its trunk, nestled in the nook where bark meets root, is a folded square of birch bark. Inside? A sprig of rosemary. A shiny bead. And a dried cherry. No name. No paw print. Just care. You do not cry, though your chest threatens it. Instead, you sit in the snow, cross-legged like a child, and place the offering in your coat pocket. They are not gone. They are just less seen. And now you begin to notice them again. A button on your doorstep, placed with deliberate symmetry. A stick figure made of twigs, balanced against your fence post. A line of acorns tracing the edge of the post office roof. Subtle things. Quiet things. Less like a truce. More like an understanding. Daisy spots them too, of course. She's older now. Less crayons, more ink pens. But her notebook is fuller than ever, the margins crammed with theories. She tells you one afternoon, I think they're testing us. You raise an eyebrow. Not in a bad way, she clarifies. Just seeing if we'll keep caring, even without the drama. You smile. Because she's right. The town still makes offerings. But they do so now without expectation. Just small gestures. A sunflower seed tucked on a fence. A knitted mitten hung in a tree. A note left on a stump that reads simply, "Still friends?" That spring, the squirrels return more visibly. No parades. No grand gestures. Just one, then three, then many, scattering through the trees with the same cautious curiosity they showed in those early picnic days. Edgar appears once, near sunset. He sits on the porch rail, his fur a little scruffier, his eye just as sharp. You sip your tea. Offer a nod. He doesn't blink. Just twitches his tail and sets a small object beside you. A cracked watch face. Its hands frozen at noon. You both stare at it. You say nothing. Because what would you say? He leaves before the moon rises. You never see him again. But you never need to. The story is his now, and yours, and the town's. And maybe if the wind is right, the story of Fairweather Hollow's squirrel war, and the peace that followed will drift beyond the trees, through other towns, into other ears. Told softly, with laughter, and wonder, and one perfectly placed ginger snap. Spring in Fairweather Hollow does not arrive all at once. It creeps in gently, like a neighbor who doesn't want to interrupt. Snow drips away from rooftops in rhythmic tap-taps. The brooks begin to babble their gossip again, and crocuses bloom in places you forgot existed under the blanket of frost. With the squirrels more scarce than ever, the town feels both calm. You stroll your familiar path through town, now in lighter boots and a scarf that smells of fresh air rather than mothballs. The mayor waves from his porch, where he's attempting to train a robin to carry messages, unsuccessfully. Mrs. Corby calls out from behind her dahlias, "Any new squirrel news?" You shrug, then smile. Only the usual, mysterious stick pile, questionable walnut arrangement, and one suspiciously symmetrical dandelion ring. She nods solemnly. Ah. So, Wednesday then? Indeed. The town has grown so accustomed to signs and symbols that even when there's no confirmed squirrel sighting, the smallest oddity becomes a source of whispered excitement. A chewed corner on a seed packet? Possibly squirrel commentary on municipal planting strategies. A broom found leaning the wrong way against the bakery wall? Surely an encoded message. You lean into it. Because that's what stories do, they stretch, adapt, become part of how a place breathes. Daisy has now begun a school project called Squirrel Semiotics, a guide to fuzzy diplomacy, complete with sketches, diagrams, and a glossary of tail flicks. She presents an early draft to the town council, who listen with the grave attention usually reserved for fire safety updates and pie judging criteria. Meanwhile, the town's mural, remember the one painted on the old grain barn, has been touched up. Someone, and no one will admit who, has added a new figure, a squirrel wearing spectacles and holding a tiny chalkboard. Next to it the words, Lesson 1, Listen. You pause by the mural often now, especially after dusk, when the paint seems to glow a little with the kind of quiet pride only communities can have. Communities that have gone through something absurd, and tender, and unspokenly important. And though Edgar no longer appears, his legacy, well, let's just say it's gotten elaborate. There's now a pastry at the bakery called the Edgar Turnover, walnut fig filling, shaped like a tail. There's a bench plaque commemorating the quietest negotiations in town history. And there's even a new town motto, voted on unanimously. In Crumbs Trust. The Watch, long disbanded, has reformed into a new social club called the Mutual Observation Society, which mostly involves sitting in rocking chairs, eating scones, and occasionally squinting at the woods like something might wave back. It's less about vigilance now, more about honoring a very particular form of connection, that strange bridge built between two species, one cautious tail flick at a time. But just when the town thinks the squirrels have settled fully into myth, something curious happens. Late one night, during a mild thunderstorm, you're awoken not by thunder, but by sound. A scratching. A light patter. A thunk. You open your door. And there, on your welcome mat, is a bundle. Wrapped in birch bark, tied with twine. Still damp from rain. Inside, one shelled pecan, a snap pencil stub, and, remarkably, a postage stamp. The stamp is from 1913. You stare at it, blinking through the fog of sleep and wonder. What does it mean? Is it a commentary on communication? A long-lost piece of mail finally returned? A symbolic gesture acknowledging the passage of time? You bring it inside and set it gently on the mantel. In the morning, you tell the town. By noon, theories abound. It's a squirrel time capsule. It's their way of saying we remember. It's a bill. They want us to pay for the almonds. But no matter the theory, the feeling is the same. They're still here. Still watching. Still participating. Still present. You begin noticing other things too. The way the leaves fall in spirals near the bandstand. The arrangement of pebbles beneath the elm. The occasional appearance of a berry placed neatly atop a fence. Not Edgar. Not yet distinguished. But composed. It stares at you. Not with the fierce calculation Edgar had, but with calm. Poised. Observant. You give a slow wave. It doesn't run. Instead, it hops down the shingles, balances briefly on the edge, and drops something. You find it a moment later in the flower bed. A cork. A bead. A bent paperclip twisted into a shape that almost resembles a heart. You smile. Back in your kitchen, you add it to the windowsill collection. The feather. The almond. The thimble. The button. The gold-painted watch face. And now the cork. A museum of sorts. A tiny archive of goodwill. Historians still argue whether the squirrel artifacts were intentional, or merely the charming chaos of curious creatures with busy paws. But you don't argue. You simply keep receiving. And responding. Because this is what the story is now, not a battle, not a truce, but a relationship. A living thing. A quiet, ridiculous, beautiful rapport between beings who will never speak the same language, but who understand somehow that listening is enough. That respect can be a folded leaf. That friendship can be a pecan and a stamp. And that sometimes, all you need to keep a story alive, is to keep noticing. By midsummer, Fairweather Hollow hums with its usual blend of practicality and gentle eccentricity. Wildflowers bloom in tangles by the fences, the bees hold long, droning conferences in the clover, and the town square hosts impromptu debates about whether lemonade is best with thyme, mint, or left alone entirely. The answer, as usual, depends on who you ask and what kind of week they'd had. You continue your morning walks, always with your pouch of snacks, now considered civic squirrel offerings by the town charter, thanks to a recent, and very narrowly passed, vote. The porch swing creaks just enough to feel alive. Children chase each other under bunting hung for no particular reason, and on the third Tuesday of July, a small banner appears on the old bell tower. It reads, in perfectly shaped pine cones, "Hello again." You laugh aloud. So do several passers-by. The squirrels, it seems, are feeling social. Over the next few days, signs multiply. Little arrangements appear in high-traffic squirrel zones, clusters of wild berries sorted by color, acorns stacked in precarious towers, even one elaborate scene made of twigs that appears to depict two squirrels holding a council meeting beside a pie. The town takes it in stride. The baker adds squirrel-shaped sugar cookies to her morning tray. Daisy updates her Squirrel Semiotics Guide with a new chapter titled The Era of Constructive Whimsy. The mayor attempts to deliver an official thank you speech at the bandstand, but is interrupted by a squirrel who flings a cherry pit into his hat and scampers off. This is interpreted as encouragement. You, of course, keep collecting artifacts. One morning you find a piece of bark with a delicate spiral carved into it. Another day, a thistle flower, dried and carefully wrapped in a strand of yarn. Then, perhaps most puzzling, a pebble painted with an arrow pointing downward. You check under the porch. Nothing. Daisy says it's probably metaphysical. The town loves it. Because it's not just whimsy anymore, it's tradition. There are squirrel-themed parades now. Nothing flashy. Just townsfolk in acorn-bedecked hats and children jingling walnut bells as they march around the square. The festival is renamed Gathering of the Small Paw, and features crafts, seed swapping, and an annual tale. You host a storytelling circle, seated on hay bales under a linen awning. People sip cold cider and listen to tales of the Great Squirrel War. Not the war itself, but the odd, lovely things that happened around it. The day the squirrels arranged Mrs. Pensby's teacups. The time a young squirrel left a button inside a boot and was chased for 3 blocks. The legend of the almond that looked like a ghost. Then one story surfaces that you hadn't heard before. Daisy leans over during the storytelling and whispers, "I think I saw Edgar last night." You blink. He was older, she says. Fur a little gray. But it was him. Where? She points. By the windmill. Just watching. Then he turned and left. You nod slowly. No fanfare. No gifts. Just there. Present for a moment. Like an old friend passing through town, not to be seen but simply to know you're still doing well. You wonder how many of the townspeople have had similar moments. Quiet encounters not spoken aloud. Brief flickers of recognition in the branches. A tail flick. A pause. A blink. And then gone. Historians still debate whether Edgar was one squirrel or several, a myth stitched together by imagination and tail patterns. Some insist he was a sort of forest diplomat, others a hyper-intelligent outlier. A few believe he was never real at all, just a symbol given life by hope and repetition. But you? You remember the bell. You remember the altar in the woods. You remember the almond, the watch face, the painted stone. And you remember that stare, the steady, intelligent look of a creature who saw you watching and didn't run. That's enough. Late one night, when the town has fallen into a velvet hush, you sit on your porch with a cup of mint tea and a slice of pie. You set a thimble beside you, then a sunflower seed, and, on a whim, the bead from last spring's gift bundle. The wind shifts. You hear it first, not see it, the faintest rustle in the maple. Then a shape. A squirrel. Not Edgar. Younger. Lighter on its feet. It hops to the porch railing, pauses, tilts its head. You offer a sunflower seed. It takes it slowly. No fear. Just measured trust. Then, before it turns to leave, it does something new. It places something beside the bead. A single daisy petal. You smile. Because of course. Because daisy. Because this is what happens when a town listens. When people pause before waving a broom. When children write guides to tale language and elders knit squirrel scarves with pockets for pecans. You lean back. Look at the sky. And think, not every truce ends with papers signed and hands shaken. Sometimes it ends with a daisy petal, left in silence, in the moonlight. And somehow, that means more. The day begins with sunlight so gentle it feels like an apology for all the foggy mornings before. Fairweather Hollow wakes slowly, shutters creaking open, sleepy greetings drifting across porches, and the occasional sound of someone whistling badly while carrying a basket of fresh bread. You step outside with your usual cup of tea, now served in your squirrel peacekeeper mug, an accidental gift from the town committee after a mix-up at the printer. The squirrel on it is wearing a tiny monocle. You've grown fond of it. At your feet, a small arrangement, 3 pebbles, 1 acorn, and a piece of dried orange peel, curled like punctuation. You don't need to interpret it. The squirrels are communicating again, sporadically, unpredictably, but earnestly. And now the townsfolk have begun replying in kind. Daisy leads a morning ritual in the schoolyard called mutual gifting practice. There is still no consistent pattern. No code cracked. But the town has stopped trying to define it. They just receive. This morning, as you walk the eastern path by the old granary, you spot something new, a circle of pine cones. Not stacked, not arranged like arrows, just laid in a tidy ring. Inside it, a feather and what appears to be the lid of a paint tin, clean to a shine. You sit beside it. Not to disturb. Just to be near it. You think about how far things have come. From watch bells and emergency ledgers to quiet tokens and shared space. The war, if it ever was one, is now a bedtime story. The truce has faded from treaty into habit. What remains is not policy, but poetry. And in Fairweather Hollow, that's more than enough. Still, there are reminders. At the post office, Mrs. Pensby receives a package with no return address. Inside? A bundle of sunflower seeds and a tiny flag made from a postage stamp. She takes it home, places it under glass, and writes a letter to whoever might be listening. Thanks for remembering. No one asks who sent it. That same week, Pexley Cray wakes to find his weather vane restored, this time painted in alternating stripes of green and gold. Beneath it hangs a scrap of paper, slightly chewed, that reads in bold crayon, "Wind is nice today." Again, no questions. Just smiles. Historians still argue whether this phase marked a formal squirrel farewell or a continued experiment in cohabitation. Some call it the third movement in the town's human-squirrel relations. Others label it the gift economy of nonsense. You personally lean toward the quiet exchange. Because what matters isn't the origin, it's the rhythm. You give. You receive. You notice. On one particularly warm afternoon, the town holds a tea party, not just any tea party, but a commemorative sit-about, as named by the council. There are low tables, mismatched chairs, lace doilies that blow gently in the breeze. Scones appear like magic. Someone brings marmalade. Someone else brings a harp. No one plays the harp well, but everyone claps anyway. You bring a plate of walnut tarts, place one near a tree, and wait. And sure enough, within minutes, a small squirrel appears. Yum. Spry. Unbothered by the crowd. It hops forward, grabs the tart, pauses dramatically, clearly familiar with the concept of audience, and disappears into the underbrush. The entire party applauds. The mayor declares it a successful treaty. Later that evening, a note appears on your porch. Folded bark. Familiar twine. Inside, in tiny scratchy strokes, someone, or something, has drawn an image. A tree, a squirrel, and a human, all under one roof. Daisy interprets it as an official request for co-shelter initiatives. The baker thinks it's an invitation to host joint winter housing. The librarian says it's art. Let it be art. You nod to all of them, and start leaving scraps of cloth and dry spots near fences. Soft things. Just in case. Weeks pass. And one morning, just as dew kisses the grass and the first robin stutters into its song, you spot something by the maple tree. A nest. Not up high, but low. At eye level. Tucked safely in a knothole. Inside it, moss, yarn, 2 feathers, and very deliberately, a coin from the town's centennial year. A thank you? A claim? A promise? You don't touch it. But you sit nearby and sip your tea, a quiet witness to something beginning again. Or still continuing. It's hard to tell. In Fairweather Hollow, the line between the ordinary and the wondrous has always been unusually blurry. With crumbs and patience, and the willingness to see meaning in the strange. So you keep walking. You keep watching. And each time you pass the nest you nod. Because the story, this wonderfully odd, heart-shaped tale, is still being written. It's a hazy summer evening, the kind where time itself seems to melt a little, stretching out like a sleepy cat across the warm cobblestones of Fairweather Hollow. Lanterns glow softly along the main square, casting golden halos on the brick paths. You sit on your usual bench, nibbling the edge of a honey biscuit, thinking vaguely about whether Edgar ever had a preference for syrup. The town feels suspended, like something waiting to exhale. Around you, people drift in lazy arcs, children playing chalk games that inevitably end in philosophical debates about who invented lava, old friends comparing flower yields, and Daisy, now taller and perpetually scribbling in her second squirrel journal, which she's labeled Volume 2, Whiskers and Wonders. You're watching the shadows lengthen when something peculiar happens. A sound. Not loud. Not dramatic. A rhythmic rustling. A sort of organized rustling. You follow it instinctively toward the old schoolhouse, the one that hasn't held classes in years but now functions as a storage space for miscellaneous town artifacts and one very confused broom collection. There, in the narrow alley between the schoolhouse and the miller's shed, you find it. A procession. Squirrels. Dozens. Not running. Not scrambling. Marching. Well, squirrel marching. In small, semi-coordinated clusters, they carry objects in their tiny paws and mouths. Twigs, ribbons, bottle caps, pebbles, a very small handkerchief that once belonged to the mayor. He later denies this. They're headed somewhere. They have purpose. You blink, unsure whether you're witnessing a migration or a parade. And then you notice, they're depositing the objects in a wide circle around the base of the schoolhouse oak. Meticulously. Like setting up camp. Or founding something. You don't move. You barely breathe. Because what you're seeing feels historic. By morning the news has spread, the squirrels have declared a place. That's how it's phrased on the impromptu chalkboard the librarian hangs outside her window. The townsfolk flock to the site, but everyone's unusually respectful. Quiet. No one tries to touch anything. Even the baker, who is known for her impulse to leave pastries in the nearest available hollow, holds back. The squirrels work all day. They create small wall-like borders from nutshells, construct what appear to be watch platforms from twigs and flattened tin. They even build what Daisy insists is an administration hut, though the only evidence is a tiny patch of moss with a pebble stack beside it. At sunset, the squirrels vanish into the trees, leaving behind a squirrel village. The town gathers at dusk, standing just far enough back, as if the whole thing is fragile, like a dream you don't want to breathe too hard on. Someone brings tea. Someone else hums a lullaby. No one says much. Historians still argue whether this was a form of performance, protest, or play. Some believe the squirrels, observing human society for so long, decided to mimic town planning. Others say it was a symbolic offering, a way of showing they could build too. A few speculate it was simply where the ground was driest, and the sun hit nicest around 4 p.m. You don't know. But that night, as fireflies blink gently through the trees and the stars blink back with equal patience, you sit on your bench and feel something you hadn't felt in a while. Not just peace. Not just nostalgia. But all. And then, a small squirrel, fur pale and eyes bright, climbs the oak tree. It sits there, high on a branch, tail curled around its The town builds a low rope barrier around it, not to keep the squirrels in, but to prevent enthusiastic toddlers from appointing themselves mayor. A small sign is added. Squirrel Settlement. Please observe kindly. It becomes a local attraction. Tourists trickle in from neighboring towns. They sip local cider, snap polite photos, and buy official nut department pins from Daisy, who has started her own merchandise table. She gives you one for free. It's shaped like a pecan with tiny wings. You wear it proudly. But not everyone is sold on the new arrangement. Mr. Hargraves, who runs the antique shop, mutters that the squirrels are getting too organized. Next they'll want zoning rights, he grumbles, while polishing a globe that still has pressure on it. The mayor, though, disagrees. Let them have their space, he says, while balancing a basket of strawberries on one hip and a lopsided gardening hat on the other. Every town needs its poetry. You couldn't have put it better. Because that's what the squirrel settlement becomes, a kind of living metaphor. A reminder that peace isn't just an end to fighting. It's an act of creativity, of mutual curiosity, of tiny doorways and bottle-cap windows and the strange, steady kindness that comes from leaving things where they are and trusting them to grow. One morning, Daisy brings you a note. It's from the squirrels. She swears it is. It's written on birch bark, tied with a red thread, and contains, once again, a single drawing. This time, 2 trees. One tall, one small, and between them, a bridge made of twigs. Underneath, a walnut. You frame it. Not in a gallery. Just on your kitchen wall. Right above the windowsill where the almond, the thimble, the painted stone, the cork, and the daisy petals still sit. It fits there, like it always belonged. Summer slips into its lazy crescendo, that golden stretch where everything smells like warm grass and overripe fruit. Fairweather hollow glows, gardens bursting with tomatoes and marigolds, laundry fluttering like sleepy flags on every porch line, and the distant clatter of jam jars sealing in kitchens where time always seems a little slower. You've grown accustomed to the rhythms of squirrel diplomacy. It's no longer a question of if they'll leave you something strange, it's just when, and how odd it'll be. This morning, you wake to find a cherry pit balanced on top of a wooden spool, the whole contraption teetering just barely upright on your railing. Daisy calls it squirrel minimalism, a study in asymmetry. The squirrels are becoming artists now, apparently. And the town is completely on board. The library offers a new exhibit called Squirrel Adjacent Expression. It includes leaf collages, some of which may be accidental, tiny moss arrangements found in gutters, and one cork with 3 toothpicks stuck into it that someone insists looks like a reclining chair. Everyone votes it best in show. You still walk the squirrel settlement each evening, and it's clear the little woodland architects are not slowing down. The twig walls are firmer now, reinforced with loops of dried vine. There are visible pathways between burrows, dotted with shiny pebbles and the occasional flower petal, as if someone decided to install garden landscaping. Then there's the tower. It's new. Modest by human standards, maybe 3 feet high, but to a squirrel it's practically a skyscraper. Made from stacked tin lids, flattened juice boxes, and what looks suspiciously like Mrs. Pensby's old sugar bowl, it's precarious and proud. No one dares touch it. The mayor has it added to the town map. He also proposes a sister city arrangement. The town votes, of course. Unanimous. You get to draft the letter of recognition, which you place, with careful reverence, near the base of the sugar bowl tower. It's sealed with a pressed daisy and wrapped in baker's twine. That night it disappears. 2 days later, a response arrives. A button, a dried raspberry, and a single bead shaped like a crown. Historians still debate whether this gesture was ceremonial, or if the squirrels simply had extra beads lying around. But the effect is the same. The town is delighted. Schoolchildren start calling the settlement Little Hollow. The name sticks. Signs are made. A theme song is composed and performed with recorders and a kazoo. You'd think the squirrels would object, but instead they seem to lean into it. A second tower appears. Shorter, rounder, decorated with scraps of foil and what might be part of an old brooch. Soon there's a central square in the squirrel village, ringed with tiny arches made of curved twigs and seed pods. It's adorable. It's impressive. It's extremely well zoned. Daisy adds a new chapter to her growing manuscript: rodent municipal planning, dreams and infrastructure. You suggest it might need a footnote about compost ethics. She adds a whole appendix. And while all this unfolds, something subtle happens to the town itself. People become gentler. It starts small. The post office adds a seed tray beside the mailbox in case our smaller citizens have letters to send. The hardware store sets out bundles of twine for construction purposes. Even Mr. Hargraves begins leaving sugar cubes on his windowsill, claiming it's to bribe the wildlife into not chewing his shutters. But it's more than just squirrel outreach. People pause longer when passing one another. They share stories. Old ones, quiet ones, the kind that don't get written down, but that ripple gently through the air when you let yourself really listen. And all the while, the squirrels keep building. On a Tuesday in late August, you come across a squirrel seated atop the sugar bowl tower. It's not Edgar. This one's younger, with a faint white streak down its back and the calm poise of someone who has inherited something meaningful. You don't speak, of course, but you nod, and the squirrel blinks. Not quickly, deliberately, like punctuation. Then it vanishes. The next morning, you find something beneath the bench where you usually sit, a pressed leaf, folded into a rough triangle, with a sunflower seed tucked inside. You don't need to understand it. You just accept it. Because that's the point now. No one's waiting for clarity. Not really. This isn't about code breaking or leadership, or who's more intelligent. It's about coexistence. And maybe something even quieter than that. Something like reverence. The town begins planning a fall celebration. Not a harvest festival, not exactly. They call it the Festival of Small Deeds. There's no parade. Just music. Stories. Warm bread. People leaving offerings of soft things, yarn, wool, seed cake, in hollow logs and the crooks of trees. There's a new mural on the side of the town hall, a sprawling, dreamy image of the forest, with squirrels and humans seated in a circle beneath stars. Daisy helps paint it. You help carry the scaffolding. The mayor tries to bring snacks, drops most of them, and ends up with jam on his sleeves. No one minds. It's beautiful. At the center of the mural, a tiny bridge of twigs. And beneath it, one word: listen. You stand before it that evening, lantern in hand, as the town hums around you. Children run barefoot. The air smells like nutmeg and cider. A squirrel scampers across the mural's edge, pauses as if admiring it, then vanishes into the tree line. No fanfare. No applause. Just the shared, sacred hush of something being cared for. You press a button into the grass, beside the sugar bowl tower. You wake to the sound of acorns dropping, not just falling but being launched, and you smile before your eyes are even open. It's squirrel harvest season. And Little Hollow, the squirrel settlement at the base of the schoolhouse oak, has never looked more bustling. You visit after breakfast, tea in hand, biscuit in pocket, one for you, one for negotiation purposes. The village has grown in height and complexity. Small twig ladders now connect different branches. One structure features a hollow thimble on its roof like a chimney cap. There are new decorations too, an arrangement of crabapple seeds shaped into a spiral and what appears to be a tiny, hand-polished stone set like a doorstep. You find yourself nodding as if admiring real estate. Daisy's taken to calling it the Eastern Quarter. Today, there's something new, a tiny archway built from bent twigs and a string of what look like yellow beads. At its base, a curled oak leaf with one corner dipped in honey. You know better than to touch. Instead, you sit nearby and observe. Two squirrels, young and spry, dart in and out of the twig structures. One pauses to adjust a pebble. The other balances upright and squints at you in what can only be interpreted as bureaucratic tolerance. You tip your cap. Historians still argue whether this phase marked a symbolic merging of urban planning and squirrel social order, or if it was just an elaborate nut stash disguised as architecture. Either way, it's magnificent. Back in the square, preparations for the Festival of Small Deeds continue. The baker is crafting tiny seed-studded biscuits shaped like acorns. The local fiddler has composed an original tune called Waltz for Whiskers. The mayor, after much lobbying, has agreed not to give another speech beginning with, "When I was a boy, squirrels feared us." You're helping decorate the lampposts with dried flowers and thread. Daisy makes signs out of bark, "Give gently, leave treats," and your personal favorite, "Watch for tiny traffic." The town feels more woven together than ever before. Not in the way of sameness, but in shared care. Everyone knows their place, their quirks, their part in the delicate balance of this sleepy ecosystem of humans, squirrels, and well-meaning confusion. You're tying a final ribbon to the library's fence post when you see it. A squirrel. Not just any squirrel. Edgar. Older now. His fur is a little duller, his movements slower. But the posture, the unmistakable way he surveys a space like he already knows the ending of your story, that's him. He's perched on the branch of a low ash tree, just across from Little Hollow. Watching. You don't move. He doesn't either. Instead, he lifts one paw in a way that could be a wave, or simply an itch. You return the gesture anyway. And then he's gone. That night, you leave a thank you note on birch bark near the base of the schoolhouse oak. Just 2 words, still listening. In the morning, it's gone. In its place, a single sunflower seed wrapped in a red thread. No one says anything. They don't need to. Instead, they keep giving. Children slip beads into tree hollows like whispered secrets. Elderly folks leave pieces of lace and folded napkins on low branches. Someone, probably Daisy, balances a miniature book, the size of a walnut, on a fence rail. The cover reads, Peaceable Kingdom, Volume 1. The squirrels, for their part, begin leaving notes too. Not written, not exactly, but shaped. A circle of seeds around a feather. A string of acorn caps laid like footprints. One especially moving display appears at the War Monument. A line of pebbles leading up to a walnut half-shell, filled with water and a single clover. No one touches it. The town adds a small card beside it that says, Respect lives here. Fairweather Hollow begins drawing visitors, artists, scholars, day trippers looking for something different. They come expecting a novelty and leave strangely quiet, having sensed something unexplainable and real. Some cry. Some laugh. Most take nothing but a photo and leave behind a token, a bead, a ribbon, a note. It's become the custom now. No ticket booth. Just the exchange. At the bakery, a visitor leaves a tiny, hand-carved mouse figurine on the windowsill. At the general store, someone adds a scrap of music paper with a treble clef drawn in gold ink. At your door, one morning, you find a feather and a postage stamp tucked into a folded page of a poetry book. The line it's wrapped around reads, Some things are best left softly unexplained. You smile. Because of course. Because in this place, the squirrels are more than animals. They are co-authors. Quiet citizens. Carriers of small messages in a loud world. The Festival of Small Deeds arrives on the last Saturday of October. It's cool and crisp. Candles flicker in jars. Bread warms hands. Children wear squirrel ear headbands. Daisy has created a squirrel history walk through town, complete with trivia signs and paw print stencils. You guide a group through it, pointing out the great walnut compromise site and the spot where the first peace offering, the almond, remember, was received. The final stop is Little Hollow. A hush falls over the group as you approach. The Squirrel village is still, lit only by the soft amber of lanterns hung nearby. A few squirrels dart in the background, but mostly it's peaceful. Waiting. Someone begins to hum. Others join. Not a planned song. Just a tune. A lullaby. A hymn of sorts. You sit on your bench and close your eyes. And when you open them, you find something resting beside you. A pine cone. Not unusual in itself. But this one is gilded at the tip. And wrapped in thread. A final gift? An answer? A punctuation mark? You take it gently. And whisper, "Thanks for staying." The festival of small deeds ends not with fireworks, not with announcements or closing ceremonies, but with lanterns, dozens of them, floated gently down the creek that winds through Fairweather Hollow like a lazy serpent too polite to bother anyone. Each lantern holds a candle, a paper message, and a small offering, a nut, a ribbon, a scrap of kindness made visible. You release yours just after dusk. It drifts slowly, carried by a current so gentle it seems unsure of its job. The flame flickers, then steadies. You watch it for a long time before it disappears around the bend near the alder grove. Somewhere nearby, a squirrel chitters softly, like applause. The next morning is still. The kind of stillness that comes after something sacred. Not solemn, just full. Like the town itself is exhaling, trying to find the ordinary again. You walk to Little Hollow with your mug of spiced tea, now a blend made especially for the squirrel watchers, featuring hints of cinnamon, clover, and something vaguely nutty, according to the label. You take the long route past the church that no longer holds sermons but does host weekly pie swaps, and the former cobbler's shop, now home to a wildly overdecorated community corkboard. When you arrive, something is different. Not missing. Not broken. Just simplified. The sugar bowl tower is gone. In its place stands a small mound of moss, carefully flattened. Atop it sits one sunflower seed and one acorn, laid side by side like twin moons. No other objects. No thimbles, no painted stones, no bottle caps. Just these two humble tokens, glowing quietly in the morning light. You kneel beside them and exhale. Historians still argue whether this moment marked the Squirrel Society's symbolic winter withdrawal, or a deliberate lesson in minimalism. Some have even speculated the entire village was a seasonal installation piece by particularly avant-garde rodents. But you know better. You've been here for every note, every feather, every bead. And you've learned that in Fairweather Hollow, meaning doesn't come from spectacle. It comes from presence. Still, the town takes notice. Children visiting Little Hollow begin whispering when they approach, as if afraid to disturb something sacred. The mayor declares the settlement a historic ongoing development, which makes no legal sense but earns unanimous approval. Mrs. Pensby begins writing haikus about moss, one of which is published in the town newsletter, and wins most emotionally resonant use of lichen. Meanwhile, the squirrels become harder to spot. They're not gone, not entirely. But their appearances are quieter, their offerings subtler. A single button. A torn postage stamp shaped like a star. One day you find a ring of rosemary tucked under your welcome mat. You leave a slice of apple in return. Daisy coins a term for this era, the gentle eclipse. She argues the squirrels are entering a period of inward turning, a natural quietude before winter. Her theory includes drawings, diagrams, and a proposed council meeting to discuss a town-wide sympathetic hibernation schedule. You suggest maybe everyone could just go to bed a little earlier. She agrees but insists on naming it something more poetic. And so begins Evening Fold, a town tradition where, after sundown, people dim their lights, sip warm drinks, and avoid unnecessary noise. It spreads quickly. Households place candles in windows. Families tell old stories aloud instead of watching television. A few brave souls attempt squirrel lullabies, mostly humming and a lot of trial and error whistling. The effect is undeniable. Fairweather Hollow becomes slower, softer, You notice it most one evening while sitting in the square. The benches are full, folks wrapped in shawls and scarves, sharing flasks of tea and slices of pear cake. No one is talking loudly. A few are knitting. A few are reading. One person is simply watching the wind nudge a feather across the bricks. You sip your drink and wonder, how did a squirrel standoff lead to this? This town that hums instead of buzzes. This place where people leave gifts for animals, not out of duty but delight. You glance toward the trees and think you see movement. A tail. A flicker of fur. And then, stillness. But that's the point now. You don't chase the moment. You let it come to you. The post office begins receiving odd letters, envelopes with no addresses, just doodles of leaves or paw prints. They're placed in a small wicker basket labeled unspoken mail. Daisy insists these are squirrel correspondences and reads them aloud on Thursdays. Her favorite reads, whirl of leaf, tap of toe. Stop. Begin. Stop. Begin. You all agree it's probably a poem. The librarian starts compiling them into an anthology titled Soft Voices, Small Paw Prints. Some evenings you write your own. You leave them folded under bark, tucked into fence posts, pinned to porch rails with smooth stones. You never sign them, but always add a doodle, a feather, a curled tail, a sleeping face. The squirrels take some. Leave others. One evening you find your poem returned, now accompanied by a single cherry blossom petal, pressed flat and tied with a strand of silver thread. It's not cherry blossom season. You don't ask. The baker starts a new tradition, moon-shaped pastries filled with mashed hazelnut and honey, sold only during evening fold. She names them crescent nods. They sell out every time. One night the town gathers for an impromptu story hour. Children curl up on blankets. Adults perch on benches or lean against tree trunks. The mayor reads from the tale of Nutkin, his voice reverent and slightly wobbly. Afterward, someone recites from memory the story of the almond, and a small child raises their hand and says, "We should have almond day." Everyone agrees. Plans are drafted by morning. Life in Fairweather Hollow has become a gentle rhythm, part human, part squirrel, entirely its own. You wake with the sun, walk with purpose but not speed, and find joy in small things, a painted shell, a folded leaf, the sound of paws scampering across your porch at dawn. You no longer wonder what's next. You just listen. And the forest, in its quiet way, answers. You wake before dawn. Not because of a noise, but because of a feeling, like the air is holding its breath. The sky is pale and tender, a watercolor waiting to dry. You make your way to the porch, cup of tea in hand, wearing your softest sweater, the one with the threadbare elbows and the smell of cinnamon permanently stitched into its sleeves. Something is different. You don't know what yet, but your bones feel it. That quiet anticipation. The way a hush falls before a snowfall, even if it never arrives. Little Hollow is still. Not abandoned, just sleeping. You walk the perimeter slowly, as you've done so many mornings before. The sugar bowl tower is long gone, the thimble dome slightly tilted from the last wind, and a few acorn caps have rolled off their perches. But the village still hums with meaning. Near the base of the schoolhouse oak, you find a new object. A tiny ladder. 3 rungs. Made of matchsticks. Lashed together with what looks like the thread from an unraveling bookmark. It's leaned carefully against the trunk of the tree, not high, not flashy, just there. An invitation? A farewell? You don't move it. You just sit. And that's when you see her. Not a squirrel, not exactly. It's Daisy. She's tiptoeing down the path from the direction of the library, carrying something in both hands, wrapped in a faded tea towel and tucked close like a secret. She sees you and smiles, but it's the kind of smile that holds something behind it. "You're early," she says. "So are you." She lifts the towel to reveal a small wooden plaque. Burned into it, likely by her own hand, are the words, "To all who nibbled in peace." You read it twice. Then 3 more times. It's perfect. She sets it gently into a shallow groove she's dug in the soil, right at the edge of Little Hollow. Then she reaches into her pocket and takes out a bead, clear glass, with a tiny air bubble in the center, and presses it into the ground beside the plaque. You don't speak. You don't need to. You both just sit there, backs warm against the old oak, listening to the world begin to wake. One bird calls. Then another. Eventually, Daisy speaks. They haven't been around as much, she says soft. No, you agree. But they haven't gone. She nods. They've probably just got other things to do. Other places to nibble. It sounds like a joke, but neither of you laughs. You both understand. Fairweather Hollow has never been about permanence. Not the buildings, not the gardens, not even the treaties between human and squirrel. It's about rhythm. Gesture. Echo. Later that day, the town gathers. They weren't summoned. They just arrive. It's one of those days when no one makes a plan but somehow everyone has the same idea. A table is set up in the square. Someone brings apple slices. Someone else sets down the one she's been scribbling in for years now, with pages made from patched-together notebooks, illustrations in every margin, and more footnotes than a legal document from the moon. She stands in front of the bench, your bench, and clears her throat. She's taller now. Steadier. But her voice is still the same, a little curious, a little bright, and completely sure of itself when it counts. She begins reading from the first chapter, The Great Nut Dispute and Other Tales of Courage. And the town listens. The mayor wipes his eyes. The baker clutches a walnut tart like it's a prayer. Mrs. Pensby nods sagely, even though she's definitely asleep. The sun dips lower. Daisy finishes reading. And for a long moment, no one speaks. Then a squirrel appears. Just one. Small. Silvery tail. Dark eyes full of that same mischievous clarity that Edgar once had. It scampers across the square, pauses at the edge of the gathering, and then, with no ceremony at all, places a tiny pine needle at Daisy's feet. The whole town exhales. Some clap. Some cry. You just smile. Because it's enough. Historians still argue whether this moment marks the formal end of the so-called Squirrel Accord. Some claim it was a graduation of sorts, an official handover of peacekeeping to the next generation. Others argue it was the squirrel's way of saying, thanks for the snacks, but we've got acorns to bury. And maybe all of it is true. Or none of it. Maybe, like the best parts of history, it's meant to be a little blurry. A little magical. A little nutty. That night you take a walk. No destination. Just footsteps. You pass the mural on the town hall, still vibrant, still ridiculous, still perfect. You pause at the bench. A bead lies there. One you've never seen before, round, coppery, warm from the day. You pick it up and slip it into your pocket without thinking. Just a small thing. A kindness. Later, before bed, you place it on the windowsill. Beside it, you add a scrap of paper. Not a poem. Not a note. Just a single word. Here. Because that's what it's always been about, hasn't it? Not squirrels or treaties or pine cones or pies. Just being here. Together. Witnessing. Remembering. Sharing. In a town that declared war on squirrels and ended up finding something better than victory. It found story. And still, outside, somewhere in the quiet trees, something rustles. Not in warning. Not in fear. Just in acknowledgement. The wind shifts. You close your eyes. And smile. You wake later than usual the next morning. The light filtering through your curtains is softer, almost shy, as if it, too, is trying not to disturb anything important. Outside, the leaves are crisping at the edges, folding inward like pages of a well-loved book. The breeze carries a smell of wood smoke and something faintly citrusy. Someone's been mulling cider. When you step onto your porch, the bead is gone. The coppery one you left on the sill. In its place, a hazelnut, perfectly intact, balanced upright on a dried daisy petal. You stand there for a full minute, mug of tea forgotten in your hand, just smiling. Across the square, others are discovering their own trades. A spool of thread here. A thimble with a pine needle through the middle there. Someone finds a clover pressed flat beneath a walnut shell. Mrs. Pensby, naturally, receives a bottle cap and it wasn't scheduled. It wasn't organized. But it might be the most beloved event in Fairweather Hollow history. And it all begins with breakfast. Not one breakfast, everyone's breakfast. Communal tables stretched through the square, improvised from whatever folks can find. Planks of wood laid across barrels. Picnic benches dragged from backyards. Even a few ironing boards make their debut as avant-garde food displays. The rules are simple. Bring something, share everything, and no one eats until the squirrels arrive. It doesn't take long. 3 of them scurry down from the schoolhouse oak like tiny diplomats. The crowd quiets. The mayor tips his absurdly wide-brimmed hat. A child offers a handful of dried cranberries on a silver spoon. The squirrels do not take them. Instead, they leap onto the table and delicately nibble from a communal tart, a flaky little round thing filled with crushed pecans and honey. The baker pretends not to weep. The crowd begins to eat. And just like that, the festival is real. There's music, of course. Local fiddlers, flutists, and one surprisingly talented whistler take turns entertaining the crowd. Someone plays spoons. Someone else accompanies them with a washboard. A squirrel taps its paw to the beat, and is immediately dubbed Deputy of Rhythm. Children reenact famous squirrel events. One small group stages the Great Pie vanishing using puppets made from corn husks and googly eyes. Another duo performs Trial of the Squirrel King, in which a stuffed animal is ceremoniously found guilty of cuteness and sentenced to an hour of snuggles. There's laughter. There's dancing. Someone invents a game called Nut, Acorn, which ends in minor chaos and major giggles. You wander through it all like a dream. Everywhere you look, people are giving and receiving, buttons exchanged for pebbles, seeds tucked into mitten cuffs, tiny paper notes, passed like secrets between palms. Daisy gifts you a drawing, Edgar, sketched in profile, wearing a monocle. It's speculative, she says, but emotionally true. At some point, the mayor attempts a speech. He climbs onto an overturned crate, clears his throat, and begins with his trademark, "When I was a boy." A squirrel throws a walnut at his hat. The crowd erupts. Laughter swells. Even the mayor laughs, hands raised in surrender. Fair enough, he says. Let the stories speak today. And they do. The day unfolds in layers, conversations, gentle songs, shared recipes, small tales told beneath trees. You hear someone recount the first time they saw the Sugar Bowl Tower. Another person describes the moment they left a button and found a flower in return. Historians still argue whether the Ceasefire Festival was a spontaneous event or the culmination of months of gentle buildup. Some believe the squirrels planned it. Others insist it was merely the natural extension of a shared culture. But for those who were there, it needed no explaining. It simply was. In the late afternoon, a circle forms in the square. No one planned it, but somehow, everyone understands that it's time for reflection. People step into the center, one by one, and share something small, a thank you, a poem, a memory. You speak, too. You tell the story of the almond. How it began with a snack and became something sacred. You keep it short. The squirrel standing at your feet seems to approve. And then, just before dusk, the town presents a gift. It's a sculpture. Simple. Rough-hewn. Crafted from wood, twine, buttons, stones, and bits of scrap gathered over the months. It's a tall acorn, stylized, topped with a copper bead. The townspeople worked on it together, close enough to be seen, far enough to be respected. A tribute. No plaque. No names. Just presence. The squirrels approach as the sky turns lavender. They sniff. Circle. One climbs halfway up and rests a paw on the side. Then they vanish back into the trees. Everyone stays quiet. Then Daisy claps once, very softly. And others follow. It's not loud. It's not meant to be. Just a thank you. For everything. Later, long after the lanterns are lit, and the last of the cider has been poured, you sit once more on your bench. A squirrel pads softly onto the grass, holding something shiny. It toddles toward you and drops it near your foot. A marble. Green. Glassy. You pick it up and roll it in your hand. Cool. Smooth. Perfect. You look up. But the squirrel is already gone. Morning after the ceasefire festival feels like the town is wrapped in flannel. Everything is quieter, slower, as if the very streets are still processing the sweetness of what just happened. There are streamers in the trees, a few muffin crumbs on the benches, and half a kazoo wedged into the spokes of someone's bicycle. You take a slow walk toward Little Hollow, steaming mug in hand, a cinnamon stick poking out like a wand of calm. You half expect the squirrel village to have packed up and vanished overnight, like some woodland brigadoon. But it hasn't. It's still there. A little neater, maybe. A few structures freshly reinforced with bits of twine and cloth ribbon. The sculpture stands in place, serene and still, capped with morning dew. And beside it, two small piles. One of sunflower seeds. One of marbles. You laugh softly. The squirrels are matching your offerings now. Either that, or Fairweather Hollow has quietly become the first town to establish an interspecies bartering economy based on whimsy and mutual fascination. You like both options. That afternoon, the mayor proposes something new. He calls it neutral zones, small spaces around town where squirrels and humans can, as he puts it, exist in peaceful mutual admiration without anyone throwing baked goods or seed packets. Daisy is immediately on board. She drafts a map. 4 zones are selected, under the old swing near the mill, beside the shallow creek near the post office, the back garden of the library, and a cozy patch just behind your house. Each zone is marked with a small sign. Squirrel Human Courtesy Area. Take only what is offered. People respect it. The squirrels do too. Or at least, they seem to. One even arranges an assortment of thimble caps in a perfect triangle at the library zone, which several children insist is a treaty symbol. Daisy nods solemnly. Or a squirrel-themed bingo card. The librarian names the area the Quiet Glade. A week later, a small wooden bench appears there, carved with a faint swirl pattern and possibly nods slightly on one leg. No one claims responsibility. Everyone uses it anyway. The town begins adjusting to this new routine, this shared rhythm. People go about their days with an extra beat of awareness. They look down before stepping, lest a squirrel be scurrying nearby. They pause beside trees, scanning for new notes in the form of pebble arrangements or leaf sculptures. It's not about surveillance. It's about presence. On Wednesdays, the baker sets out a tray of misshapen pastries labeled accidental crumbles, squirrels welcome. On Thursdays, Daisy leads a Coexistence quiet walk through town. Everyone brings a smooth rock to leave behind as a token. You've begun collecting the most charming ones, one shaped like a peanut, another with a natural stripe. Squirrel-themed fashion becomes, briefly, a thing. You see at least 3 teenagers wearing acorn pendants. The seasonal bulletin board near the grocer now includes a section titled Little Hollow Happenings. It features things like Tuesday, possible squirrel council near the old bird bath. Thursday, button return to porch step, may have been a gift or a warning. Saturday, new nest sighted in the linden tree, cozy, 2 entrances, Riverview. Some entries are poetic. Found 1 feather, 3 blades of grass, and a sense of purpose. Sighted, a squirrel watching the sunset. Stayed until the stars came out. It's all real, and it's all slightly ridiculous. But that's Fairweather Hollow now. One morning you spot something near your porch stairs, a scrap of fabric, carefully wrapped around 2 polished acorns. It's tied with thread. Inside is a single seed bead and a tiny sliver of orange peel. The scent is rich and oddly comforting. You leave a piece of honeyed biscuit in exchange. This continues for days. An informal trade network of textures, smells, and quiet exchanges. No words. Just gestures. You don't keep score. Because none of it's about value. It's about effort. The town's energy begins to shift subtly. Not away from the squirrels, but inward. The colder winds are beginning to creep in. Coats come out. The trees are more bare than gold now. You can smell frost on the ground before it even forms. People prepare for winter. And so do the squirrels. They're visibly more focused, less inclined to engage in long stares or comical mid-morning dances. You spot them scurrying with purpose, cheeks puffed full of supplies. The structures in Little Hollow are winterizing, leaves stuffed into corners, entrances narrowed, signs of insulation made from everything from moss to sweater fuzz. You begin leaving offerings more practical now. Scraps of cotton, bits of wool, a pinch of oats, a line of yarn that stretches from your porch to the nearest tree stump like a tiny runway. Historians still argue whether these preparations were collaborative or parallel, whether squirrels adapted their routines to human rhythms, or whether the humans simply learned to notice what was already there. But again, you're not here for theories. You're here for the sound of paws scampering over shingles, for the silence that follows a shared glance with a wild creature, for the joy of finding something small left behind that no one else noticed, and for the chance to leave something behind in return. That evening, you walk to the quiet glade. You bring a little packet of herbs, wrapped in a napkin embroidered with daisies. You leave it beneath the bench, tucked gently beside a button you think might have been there since summer. Then you sit and wait. Not for anything in particular. Just for the shift in air, the rustle of grass, the sense that somewhere nearby, something small and brave is watching you right back. The next morning brings frost. Not a heavy, dramatic sort, the kind that smothers every branch and makes news headlines, but a light dusting. Just enough to trace the fence rails in sugar and kiss the top of your mailbox with glitter. The kind that makes everything look like it's holding its breath. And suddenly your porch boards creak louder. The warmth from your mug of tea feels like it matters more. Even your breath turns visible, like it's part of the morning's small performance. Fairweather Hollow has turned a corner. Autumn is now on the retreat, its pockets emptied of gold. The trees stand mostly bare, their final confetti scattered on sidewalks and collected by squirrels with serious expressions. You bundle up in your thickest scarf, technically a repurposed picnic blanket, and make your way down to Little Hollow. What you find stops you in your tracks. It's not gone. No. But it's changing. The once elaborate structures are pared down, simplified. Thatched with drier grasses, flanked by bark and packed earth. What once looked like whimsy now resembles survival. The sugar bowl tower? Gone entirely. Replaced by a neat pile of flat stones arranged like a cairn. The acorn stack is there, but half covered in moss and straw. And the sculpture, the stylized acorn with the copper bead, is adorned with one thing, a pine sprig. Still green. Fresh. Placed deliberately. The squirrels are out, but not lingering. You catch glimpses, a tail here, a flash of movement there. They are quieter, twitchier. Focused. You sit on the bench and feel it too. That sense of draw-in. Of burrowing down. Of letting go of sparkle and leaning into stillness. You think about the town, how it's begun doing the same. Shops now close earlier. Porch lights glow longer. Even the bakery's treats have shifted. Gone are the fruit tarts and raspberry crumbles. In their place, oat scones, cinnamon twists, and little pies filled with things you can't quite identify but taste like warm hugs and long naps. The post office adds a new crate near the front door, labeled simply, "For the Hollow." No instructions. Just a basket. People drop things in as they pass. A spool of thread, a scrap of wool, an old chess piece, a half-used tea sachet with a note attached. Smells like bedtime. You contribute a tiny envelope with a feather inside. No return address. The mayor, for once, refrains from grand proclamations. Instead, he quietly starts leaving apple slices on his porch rail. By the third morning, they're gone. He doesn't replace them. He just smiles. One day, Daisy shows up at your door with a box. It's filled with Squirrel sketches. "Can you help me bind these?" she asks, as though she hasn't just handed you the illustrated history of Fairweather Hollow's most inexplicable peace movement. You say yes. Together you sit at your kitchen table for hours, threading pages, pressing corners, smoothing bindings. She titles it, Chronicles of the Acorn Accord, a semi-factual account of rodent diplomacy. You ask if she plans to publish it. She shakes her head. Not yet. It's not finished. A few nights later, you're woken by a soft thump outside your window. Not ominous. Just curious. You shuffle to the sill and look out. There's a squirrel on your porch rail. It's not Edgar, too small, too bright-eyed, too twitchy. This one is holding something. You open the door slowly, breath misting in the cold. The squirrel doesn't move. It places the object on the porch rail, a button, shiny and blue, with 4 tiny holes, and then vanishes. You don't follow. You don't need to. You just smile and pick it up, turning it over in your fingers like a coin of kindness. The button joins your collection, the bead, the marble, the pressed clover. You place them all in a small dish by the door. Some nights you light a candle beside it. No ceremony. Just thanks. The town continues its gentle slide into winter. The trees empty. The skies dull. And still, the energy remains, less sparkly, more candlelit. Daisy organizes an event she calls the Tuck-In, a sort of town-wide bedtime story ritual, where everyone agrees to read something cozy at exactly 8:30 p.m. No one checks if you do it. You just know you should. One evening during the Tuck-In, you hear a faint scratching near the hearth. Not a threat. Not even a visitor. Just a reminder. Something alive, curious, close. And then it's gone. You sit back and keep reading. Another, a poem. Soft pause, swift thoughts. A nut not stolen, but given. Peace inferred silence. You don't expect a reply. But sometimes there is one. A feather twisted around a pine needle. A perfect acorn cap polished. Once, a thimble filled with dried lavender. Each one means more than the last. The town holds one final gathering before the first snow. Not a festival, just tea and music and soft sweaters in the square. A few lanterns. A few chairs. Someone strings up squirrel-shaped bunting. Children pass around chestnuts with initials carved into them. You bring a scarf to donate to for the hollow crate. Daisy brings hot chocolate with just the right amount of spice. The mayor tells a story about the time a squirrel tried to steal his wig. Changed my life, he says. Honestly, never wore it again. Everyone laughs. Even the trees seem to lean in. You catch one last flicker of fur near the edge of the square. Just a flash. A whisper of movement. And that's enough. Because the story doesn't end. It just rests. Like the squirrels. Like the hollow. Like the town wrapped in frost, waiting not for spring, but for quiet. For breath. For the space between chapters. The snow comes not with fanfare, but with grace. You wake one morning to find the world gentled into white. No gusty storm, no howling wind, just a silent exhale from the sky, covering the rooftops, the hedgerows, the squirrel-trodden paths, all blanketed like a page turned down to rest. Fairweather Hollow in snow feels quieter than even sleep. Even the town clock seems to tick slower. Your boots crunch on the way to the square, each step a soft punctuation mark. You pause outside the bakery, not yet open, but the scent of cinnamon and cloves still escapes under the door like it's trying to make friends. At Little Hollow, everything is tucked in. The little structures are covered over, humped with snow and moss, barely visible. You only know they're still there because of the small, clean paths that weave between them, tunnels and trails pressed neatly into the frost. It's no longer a village, it's a memory of one. A dream with footprints. You leave a dried cranberry in a tiny dish and don't wait to see who takes it. Somewhere behind you, a squirrel chatters softly. Not at you. Not to you. Just near you. The mayor, true to form, declares this the season of mutual hibernation, and nobody bothers correcting him. Daisy shortens it to snooze treaty. And so it goes. The townsfolk lean into it, hard. Firewood piles get taller. Blankets multiply. Candles appear in every window, even the post office. Someone, no one knows who, begins chalking squirrel-sized haikus onto fence rails. For flash, branch shuffle. Seed dreams stored beneath bark skin. Not gone. Just curled close. The library holds a quiet reading day, during which no one speaks aloud for 6 hours. Patrons write book reviews on sticky notes, and pass them like secret valentines. You receive one that reads, "Chapter 9 made me sob." In a good way. You never find out what book it refers to. That's part of the magic. The squirrel zones remain open, but mostly untouched. The sign behind your house is half buried in snow now, only the top visible, squirrel human coo, the rest is implied. You spend more time indoors. Not in loneliness, just in slowness. You repair mittens. You sip warm things. You write small notes and press them between the pages of books you plan to donate. Some of them say only yes. Others say nothing at all. The mayor begins hosting fireplace chats at town. Sometimes someone brings squirrel news. 3 of them ran across the library roof yesterday. Looked like a conga line. Found an acorn balanced on my doorknob. Possibly a critique of my wreath? Something took a bite out of my mitten and left a peanut in the pocket. And each time someone responds, sounds diplomatic. The wind outside is sharper now, but inside, things are soft. Daisy brings you a gift, a tiny, hand-bound journal no larger than your palm. Inside, every page is blank except for the final one. There she's written. For your thoughts. For your exchanges. For whatever little thing you want to leave behind. You press a button into the center crease and tuck it into your coat pocket. That night, as the snow thickens, you return to the quiet glade. It's hard to see, even with your lantern. The bench is nearly invisible beneath the drift. But the plaque remains. Barely a sliver of wood showing, but enough to know. The hollow remembers. You dig gently, brushing aside the snow with your mitten until the bench is clear enough to sit. It creaks beneath your weight like it's glad to be noticed. From your pocket, you take Daisy's tiny journal. You open it, and without planning to, begin to write. I don't know what this was. But I know it was real. And I think I'm better for it. You tear out the page, fold it twice, and place it under the bench leg, pressed between the wood and the ground. You don't expect anything back. You don't need it. Still, the next morning, you find a pine needle on your doorstep. Tied in a perfect bow. The hollow may be sleeping, but it still watches. Still responds. People in town begin exchanging hollow nods, small, silent acknowledgments passed on the street. No words, no wave. Just a glance and a little dip of the chin. Everyone seems to understand. You spot Daisy doing it with a grocer's assistant. The mayor gives one to a passing mail carrier, who responds by drawing a heart in the condensation of a storefront window. No one explains it. They just do it. One evening you wake to a tapping sound. Faint. Rhythmic. Like claws on wood. You rise, pad to the window, and peer out. There, in the snow beneath the eaves, you see them, 3 squirrels. Silent. Motionless. Staring up, as if checking. Then, one by one, they vanish into the trees. And in their place, a single silver thimble, standing upright in the snow. You pick it up with both hands, as if it might break. Inside, a seed. Just one. Smooth. Dark. Unremarkable. Except you know it's not. It's something else. A promise? A thank you? Or simply a reminder, still here. The next day, you place it on the dish beside the marble, the bead, the feather. It glints in the morning light like the smallest crown. You feel it before you see it. That sense that something is turning, gently, like the slow unwinding of a music box. The snow is still on the ground, yes, and the nights are still long, but something in the light has shifted. There's gold in it again. Not the bold shine of midsummer, but a soft glow, a warm whisper at the edge of every morning. Fairweather Hollow seems to exhale as one. It's not spring. Not yet. But it's the idea of spring. The dream of it. The town's rooftops have begun shedding snow like an old cardigan. Icicles drip with a kind of rhythmic purpose. Even the crows seem to call out with more optimism than usual, if such a thing is possible from a bird that sounds perpetually inconvenienced. You step outside, and your boots don't sink as deeply. You leave your coat open at the collar. You pass by the post office and someone has chalked the words, signed with a paw print, possibly stamped in blueberry jam. You both laugh, and she hands it to you like an heirloom. The squirrels, it seems, are still here. Still watching. Still playing their quiet, curious games. Back in Little Hollow, the snow is thinning. The outlines of the miniature structures begin to reappear, edges softened, roofs dented, but there. The copper bead atop the acorn sculpture has oxidized to a gentle green, but still catches light in a way that feels like breath. You pause at your usual spot, near the bench in the quiet glade. The seat is dry now, almost warm from the sun. You sit, and reach into your pocket. The thimble is still there. Not because you forgot it. Because you couldn't part with it just yet. But now you're ready. You place it gently beneath the bench again, pressing it into a shallow hollow in the earth with your thumb. The seed is still inside. It might grow. It might not. That's not the point. As you sit there, a breeze stirs through the trees. And you remember, just briefly, the early days of the Squirrel Watch Committee. Of Daisy's paper maps and Edgar's daring raids. Of tiny trials and button tributes. Of solemn treaties sealed with jam and side eyes. You smile, because it's all true. And also, none of it needs to be proven. Because here, in Fairweather Hollow, the story has already become part of the town's rhythm. Children play nut reconnaissance behind the bakery. Teens pass notes signed with twig symbols. Even the mayor, who now sports a squirrel patch on his coat, pretends not to notice when someone swaps his cane for a pine branch every Thursday. The squirrels, for their part, continue their watch. You still find the odd pebble in your shoe. A sprig of rosemary on the porch. One unforgettable morning, you find a whole card, a playing card, nibbled slightly, with a walnut shell glued to the center. It's completely illegible and completely perfect. You pin it to the bulletin board under the label. Ongoing negotiations. Daisy finishes her book. Not the first one, the chronicles remain ever expanding, but a new one, Acorns and Accordions, the unofficial musical history of the treaty years. It includes, of course, a full score to the festival's surprise hit, One Nut More, which she assures you is a completely original composition and not at all inspired by any well-known French musicals. The library agrees to host a reading. It's standing room only. One child arrives in full squirrel costume, complete with tiny monocle. The mayor weeps halfway through the dedication. No one mocks him. Everyone claps. Afterward, as the crowd disperses and the lanterns glow low in the square, you spot a small movement near the edge of the trees. A squirrel. Just one. It stops. Looks at you. And very slowly nods. You return the gesture. Because you both know. This isn't a farewell. It's just a new season. The buildings of Little Hollow will need mending. The threads will wear. The thimbles will rust. The buttons will roll beneath porch steps. But the story? The story stays. Passed on in whispers, in smiles, in oddly specific acorn arrangements and footnotes in Daisy's books. Because once upon a time, in a quiet little town, the people went to war with squirrels. And the squirrels answered not with chaos, but with crumbs and curiosity. And what came of it wasn't victory or defeat, but understanding, and ritual, and joy. And now here you are, part of that tale. A keeper of buttons, a watcher of glades, a friend to furred diplomats. So you rise from the bench, stretch, and walk home slowly, boots crunching on the thawing path. At your porch you find a bead. Blue. Shiny. 4 holes, balanced on a thimble full of pine needles. You don't take it inside. You sit beside it. And you whisper, still here. And now, with your thoughts tucked in like soft socks in a cedar drawer, you let the last images of Fairweather Hollow drift through you, slowly, quietly, like the way snow falls on fence posts, never asking for attention, only presence. You picture the tiny paths of Little Hollow, winding under root and branch, no longer bustling with squirrel patrols, but resting, waiting. A place not forgotten, but gently folded away for another day. A place where a bead left on a sill might mean something. A place where you could trade a button for peace. Your breathing softens. Your shoulders loosen. The rhythms of the town slow to match your own, the steady creak of a porch swing, the hush of wind through bare branches, the warm clink of teacups on saucers from somewhere far off and familiar. You remember the mayor's lopsided hat, Daisy's ink-smudged fingers, the faint rustle of paws in attic corners. It's all still there, just behind your eyelids. Not urgent. Not loud. Just ready for you whenever you need it. So let yourself settle. Let your limbs grow heavy in the most comforting way. The world outside your blanket is quiet now, but not empty. There's a thimble on a bench, a marble on a windowsill, a paper heart tucked into the hollow of a tree. And somewhere, in some tree just beyond your sight, a squirrel watches from its nest, nose twitching, utterly at peace with the humans it once befriended. Still here. Still listening. Still willing to trade acorns for kindness. Sleep well, storyteller. You've made it to the end.